Again, welcome. We are in our seventh session of crew, and we have 3 sessions left. The time has really gone by fast, and we're getting through these trainings fairly quickly in this cohort. So thank you all again for joining. Give me 1 second here. Here we go. All right, so today's session is going to be around recruitment interventions, and we have our presenter here, Diana Munoz from Mary Center, who's going to be giving us some information around some recruitment efforts. So just a quick overview of the agenda. Again, our presenter, we're going to have a breakout reflection piece with some questions around your recruitment efforts at your health center, a little bit of report back, our poll, and also we're going to be doing another giveaway for a $25 gift card. So please make sure that you update your name on your Zoom so that I can get your information and we can do that giveaway at the end of the session. We're going to close out with some announcements at the end of the afternoon. All right, so just a couple of reminders on these group agreements, 3 then me. So remember to allow at least 3 other folks to speak before you speak again. Let's try to stay muted so that we can all enjoy the presentation. 1 speaker at a time. Be present and devices down, videos on when requested, and use the raise hand button function when available. Also feel free to put your questions in the chat as we go through the presentation. I'll make sure to keep an eye on the chat for any questions that come in for Deanna, and I will prompt her and let her know if any questions from you all come through. The other thing is you also update your pronouns if possible on your Zoom as well, just to make sure that we're all using the correct pronouns for you. All right, so without further interruption, I'm going to hand it over to Deanna. Welcome, and thank you for being here with us today.
And thank you for having me. And before I go ahead and share my screen and kind of do my little intro, I'm actually going to be turning my camera off as well. It kind of gets a little glitchy, but hopefully you guys enjoy this presentation while you're maybe having lunch or whatever. But I'm excited to be here, so thank you so much. 1 moment. All right, let me minimize some of this. All right. Oh, I think the transcript design, I'm not sure how to turn that off. I'm not sure if that'll be distracting for some folks. Andres, what do you think?
I think we usually turn it on. Some folks requested, so it's okay.
Just keep it great. Hopefully it doesn't catch all my ums, but that's great. So let's go ahead and get started. But good afternoon, everyone. My name is Deanna Munoz. I'm currently the Vice President of Talent Acquisition at Mary Center. We are an FQHC located in the Washington, D.C. area. And I've been at Mary Center for just over 5 years now, focused mainly on talent acquisition. You know, the recruiting, the hiring, the onboarding, all that fun stuff when bringing on new folks. So, and while we are on opposite sides of the country, our organizations do very similar work in the community. You all on a much larger scale than Mary Center, but our missions are closely aligned in providing that high quality care or healthcare, social services, education to our participants that we serve. You know, addressing every aspect of their well-being that can impact, you know, their quality of life, stability, and advancement. And before I dive in, I want to again thank you all for inviting me to present on these topics. While they may not be the quote unquote sexiest of topics to discuss, and even I would say our hiring managers at Mary Center tend to agree, my goal for today's meeting is to share best practices that I've come to learn over the years with my own experiences and from others who work in this space as well. And I'm going to hopefully leave some time towards the end of the presentation if there is any questions, but please feel free to use the chat throughout if questions pop up, and we'll get to them towards the end once the slide deck concludes. I might be asking some really, basic, simple questions if folks want to participate during the during the presentation. So you can either, if you feel like unmuting yourself and answering, or you can chime in the chat, and then hopefully someone can go ahead and read those for us. Okay, so here's our agenda for the training today, where we'll go through some or kind of touch on some of these core aspects of the recruiting process. As we review each slide, you want to keep in mind the importance of effective candidate evaluation, impartial interviewing to reduce bias, and then making those informed hiring decisions towards the end, which I think we can all agree these are really essential in the candidate experience. And then again, as I mentioned, I'll be sharing my own examples along the way, but let's go ahead and dive in and get started. So before we even, begin posting a position and evaluating candidates who have already applied, the first thing you'll want to take time to do is define your hiring needs. Depending on what your role is, this may or may not include another colleague to kind of, discuss, or this could be something that you do yourself as maybe the sole hiring manager for a position. You'll want to take some time to assess your current team's strengths and challenges. What has the team benefited or gained over the last, say, 6 months, 1 year? You can kind of define that timeline. Or what have been the challenges on the team? Is there a specific skills gap or a certain level or type of experience that you need to round out your team that maybe has been missing, over some time? It's these types of questions that you'll want to keep in mind initially in these beginning stages of the process. But along those same lines, you want to bring intentionality to recruiting. Are you looking to recruit more folks in the community with shared experiences? A lot of our positions, our hiring managers are looking for folks in the community who have had similar experiences that can relate to our participants in these roles. So is that something that you're looking for? Are you focused on, specific DEI efforts with recruiting and hiring? And in what way? What does that look like for you? A very straightforward example that I can share. About 3 to 4 years ago, our behavioral health team conducted an analysis on their staff makeup just due to some challenges that they were having. And as they were kind of going through all of this information, they realized a large percentage of their staff were young, white, female therapists. That was a bit of a wake-up call for them for a number of reasons. That could be a completely different training. But the point here is that they made intentional efforts from then on out over these last few years to recruit other ethnicities, gender identities, more seasoned therapists. Again, this is a very direct example, but one that we're still working towards today and making really great strides on. So next, you want to check out the job description. Based on your assessment from the initial hiring needs, is this job description still accurate? Do the essential duties and qualifications align with what's needed? Is the position even still relevant, or is this an opportunity to rework that position based on what's been missing in this role? Sometimes positions become obsolete when they're vacant simply due to the nature of the role. Maybe for grant purposes or grant requirements, the position is completely changing and you need to rework the job description from there. These things happen, and this is kind of your time to make those changes as needed. And lastly, it's important to create an objective evaluation criteria to ensure fairness and consistency across all the candidates that you're interviewing or evaluating. Does your team already have an objective evaluation process? If so, does everyone who participates in the evaluations and the interviews and the hiring decisions, do they also participate in that evaluation process? I hope that the answer is yes. And it's important to create some type of scoring system or a rubric to rate these candidates consistently, so you're maintaining that objectivity in this process. And I can share some examples, maybe if we have time later. If not, I'm happy to share, Mary Center's evaluation form and some other evaluation forms. Again, either after the training, or I'm happy to share that over for you guys to have as a resource. And then one final example I just wanted to share is about my team currently. So we've had an increase in hiring at Mary Center. We've been awarded a lot of new grants, which is wonderful. And teams are expanding, or we're creating new teams. So I was able to add additional recruiters to my team, and we schedule these things called intake meetings. If you guys are not aware of what those are, they usually happen around this process. And it's basically a meeting with the hiring manager where they discuss the position. What are the must-haves or the nice-to-haves in candidates? What are those qualities to ensure success in the position? Is it the ability to work independently, being results-oriented, strong teamwork or communication skills? So these intake meetings have been incredibly beneficial for both the manager and the recruiter right from the jump in this process. So I'm just, if that's something that is available to you, or you guys have the space to do that, I would highly recommend, all parties that are going to be involved with the hiring have these intake meetings. It's just been a really wonderful effort on our team for sure, especially when it comes to hiring. Okay, so we're going to jump ahead a little bit more. So your position's already been posted, candidates have been applying. So now it's time for that first round of evaluation, the resume. Likely you have an HRIS system to review and evaluate candidates. And oftentimes a lot of that information that's presented in the resume is actually also transferred into the application. So many hiring managers, at least at Mary Center, really just focus on that resume initially and or cover letter. So where do we start? I would suggest start right at the top of the resume. Most of the important information is kind of prioritized there, as the candidate's contact information, the summary or their objective statement, their key skill sets. This section also can provide a quick overview of their qualifications, but that's, usually the core of that top section of the resume. Next, you'll want to scan for any relevant keywords. So, make sure you're tapping into your job description to quickly scan for those relevant skills and experiences that you're looking for. This can also help you filter out resumes that, don't really match the job requirements from the jump. So you're not taking the time to evaluate a candidate that may not even fit the position. It's also important to assess the work experience section. There's a lot of things you're going to want to pay attention to in this section. Job titles and durations. You want to look for consistency or progression in their career. Are you noticing any or a lot of job hopping? Why is that the case? What story are they telling? You want to look at their accomplishments and responsibilities. Focus on those quantifiable, achievements and responsibilities that are relevant to that role. Oftentimes, this is kind of the space where they highlight their accomplishments or achievements, and that could be an indicator of a candidate's capabilities. Are those transferable skills in what you're looking for? Sometimes folks will apply to positions, and while they may not follow the direct career path, maybe typical of this position, maybe they have those transferable skills from another work experience or volunteer work that could fit this position really well. You'll also want to look for gaps in employment. You are more than, it's open to kind of ask for explanations if there are unexplained gaps. Of course, they want to keep in mind, the pandemic layoffs and furloughs that many of the organizations experience, and of course that we're all aware of. Next, you'll want to check out their education and certifications. Check if these align with the job requirements. Do they have the necessary degrees or licenses or certifications that are essential for the role? This section may also include volunteer work or awards or publications that provide additional context or skills of this candidate. And I know for Mary Center, for our entry-level positions or roles, a lot of the candidates, they may not have a ton of work experience. They may be, fresh out of high school or, working, part-time at university, but also are looking for a job. So they may not have a ton of work experience, but we definitely look at their volunteer work because that's just important as work experience. And again, in this section, you'll want to ensure that the candidate's qualifications, of course, match that position. Looking at overqualified candidates, they may not be satisfied in the role. Underqualified candidates, they may struggle to meet those expectations. So definitely, this is a really core part of the resume that you want to really keep an eye on. And other considerations to look at when evaluating resumes. Cultural fit, assess if the candidate's values and work style are presented in their resume, or and align with your organization's culture. I mean, this can also be expressed in cover letters if that's something that your organization's interested in using or utilizing as well. We kind of have laxed a little bit on that. Some departments still require, cover letters, and they're really important to the managers, which is fine. A lot of our managers just really focus on the resume. But you're going to want to look for clues in that resume that demonstrate a cultural fit. I know when we, evaluate candidates, a lot of, similar wording pops up in language. Mission-driven individual. They want to meet the participants where they are. They have a commitment to cultural competency and awareness, just to name a few that kind of come to mind in terms of what we tend to see often. And then kind of, closing this out, you want to check for attention to detail. Is the resume well organized? Is it error-free? Any typos or formatting issues or inconsistencies can kind of lead to some red flags, on the resume. And always remember to avoid bias. You want to be aware of unconscious biases and strive to evaluate candidates objectively. You want to focus on their qualifications and their suitability for the job rather than their personal characteristics or information. And we'll kind of touch on that in a little bit. Lastly, you want to maintain your records. Keep clear records of your evaluations and the reasons for your decisions in either moving forward or not moving forward with a candidate. This documentation can be valuable down the line for future reference, when you may get to the, the interview phase, and also for legal compliance. For instance, like we use our HRS platform to keep record of resume evaluations that both the hiring managers and the recruiter, they'll add their notes. And that's kind of a space where we are able to kind of keep all that information in one place. I will touch on this here and then maybe also a little later. This may also be the space where an assessment has already been taken based on the type of role that it is. Again, this could happen here and truly any part of the screening process and interview process. But typically these assessments help evaluate specific skills that you're looking for and qualifications for the position. Just one thing to really note here is the importance of designing a fair and unbiased assessment. So that's really key if assessments are something that your organization uses. So again, we're jumping ahead a little bit more, but we're moving past, the position's been posted, we're moving past the phone screens, if that's something that's relevant to your recruiting process. And now we're in the interview stage. So let's go ahead and just start off with some general interview etiquette points. I know some of these points may sound incredibly straightforward, but they're important and oftentimes overlooked, especially for those who may not be part of interviews very often, or possibly this might be, they may just start being part of interviews and part of the hiring process and making hiring decisions. And of course, these tips are useful for both virtual and in-person interviews. So to start off, timing. You want to be on time or even a few minutes early. Of course, this shows that the candidate's time is just as equally valuable as yours and your fellow interviewers. If something comes up, which means you're going to be late to the interview or you're not going to make it for whatever reason, you want to be proactive and let the hiring team know or the hiring manager know as soon as possible so they can kind of plan from there and if things need to change or be adjusted. If you have a work branded background, make sure it's up for the virtual interviews. And you have a headset or headphones are included if you're in a shared office or in the clinic or in another setting that may have outside noise. If a work branded background isn't, something that's used at your organization, either blur your background or find a background that is not distracting for the candidate. And along those same lines, it's ideal to use a computer versus a cell phone during interviews, as cell phones tend to show up in a different format, and that can be distracting. I've seen that happen a few times. Place your phone on silent or place it off to the side. All of this shows that your professionalism, your unison with, the interview and with the team, and it removes any distraction. You'll want to make sure your computer is fully charged, plugged in, software is updated, you have good internet. for those virtual interviews. You don't want to be halfway through an interview where your battery dies and you're running around trying to find the charger to plug it in. I've seen that a few times. And if there is if there's an interruption from a colleague, that has to come into your office, or another individual, just make sure to mute yourself, turn off your camera to avoid any distraction for those in the interview, especially the candidate. So just these little tips to keep in mind. And then if the interviews are taking place in person, of course, ensure that the interview room is clean, tidy. There's no, patient information kind of out in the open that could be seen, PHI, any of that. Just want to make sure that it's clean and tidy. And then, of course, in line with your organization's dress code, regardless of the interview location, virtual or in person, you want to wear appropriate attire, meaning neat, clean clothing should be worn just as you would show up to work any regular day. And lastly, your body language matters. Avoid, especially for in-person interviews, but they could also be distracting virtually. You want to avoid tapping your hands or your feet, fidgeting with your hair, or doing anything else that could distract the interviewee. That also includes, and I've been called out for it before, checking an email or glancing at, your team's messages or whatever, messaging platform you have, looking away from the computer, all very, very noticeable. Walking away from an interview as it's happening, or talking to someone who's walked into the room, it's all important. You just want to turn off your phone, excuse yourself, or I'm sorry, turn off your video, excuse yourself. All of these can make it seem like you're disconnected, distracted, and honestly disinterested in the candidate. So before I move on, are there any other etiquette tips that others would like to share, or that you've come to learn over time that you want to share with the group? Again, I can't see the chat, so if somebody put something in the chat, if Andres can shout that out, or if somebody wants to unmute themselves, I'd be happy to hear any other etiquette tips that you've come across.
I don't see anything in the chat, Deanna.
All right, we'll go ahead and go on. And if somebody thinks of something, just feel free to drop it in and we can bring it up later. All right, so now we're in the before the interview phase. Hiring teams or interview panelists should be prepared and well informed on how to conduct interviews effectively. You never want to go in blind. Most importantly, you want to make sure the candidate, you want them to experience a positive interview with you and your team, and just overall with the organization. So it may have been time, in this time frame, it may have been some time since you took a look at the job description. Go ahead and review it again. What were those major duties and responsibilities of the role? What are the success factors for the job? What are the most important qualities or characteristics that a successful candidate would possess? Again, it may be a few weeks since you reviewed the candidate's resume. Go ahead and take another look at it. Go back to your evaluation notes. What does their story tell you? And then you'll want to be sure you pre-select specific questions to ask every and all candidates for the role. I'll go into that in a little bit, but this is a very important part of getting ready or preparing for the interview. So along with choosing, your interview approach and deciding the questions ahead of time, the interviewer should become familiar with the types of questions and statements that must be avoided in an interview. Anything related to race, gender, sexual orientation, color, national origin, religion, age, disability. Some questions or even statements that may appear innocent on the surface may actually be considered discriminatory. So asking any questions related to that above list that I just mentioned may offend an applicant or damage the organization's reputation. And I do have an interview guide that I want to show you again if we have time later. But regardless, I want to make sure you guys have it, because we do kind of really highlight the questions or statements that you shouldn't bring up. And I know oftentimes when you're in an interview, kind of waiting for the interview to start or kind of filling the void, you may ask questions just to make them feel comfortable, but you could run the risk of offending them without knowing it, or you could damage, your organization's reputation. So we can get into that a little bit later as well. So there are different types of interview approaches, as I'm sure you guys are aware. So what are the differences? When it comes to unstructured interviews, the interviewers don't have a set order of questions, but rather kind of allow the applicant to set the pace of the interview. So questions in an unstructured interview can be tailored according to an applicant's skill and experience level, but the absence of that structure may make it difficult to compare and rank applicants because they're not all being asked the same set of questions, and that's what's key here. But with structured interviews, interviewers ask a specific set of questions that all applicants applying to the same role are being asked. This is a straightforward approach. It makes it easier for the interviewer to evaluate and compare, the candidates or applicants fairly. I mean, you still have the option to ask the questions in a predetermined order or be flexible with that order, but still make certain that you address all the planned questions and they're being asked to every applicant. And from an HR perspective, I highly recommend structured interviewing. I think it's better for all parties when you have kind of a set of questions that you want to ask your candidates. I'd say that generally provides you all the information that you need when you make a hiring decision. It's also crucial if you need to defend against any allegations of discrimination in hiring and selection, because all those applicants are being asked the same question. Next, we're moving on to interview type. Again, fairly straightforward, one-on-one versus a panel interview. So with those one-on-ones, obviously it's the candidate and you participating in the interview versus a panel interview that has generally, more than 2 individuals, 1 to 2 individuals. One-on-ones may happen either, the first interview, or it could be the final interview, depending on what the role is and the approach that you're taking. And so your hiring teams may already be kind of using behavioral health or competency-based questions during interviews, but let's go ahead and just dive into to each one a bit more. Both of them aim to discover how the candidate would perform in specific situations. So the logic is based on the principle that past performance predicts future behavior. So how the applicant behaved in the past indicates how they will behave in the future. So for behavioral based questions. So for instance, instead of asking how an applicant would handle a hypothetical situation, we would ask the applicant how they, in fact, handled a particular situation in the past. So for example, you could say, can you give me a time when you had to work closely with someone whose personality was quite different from yours? I mean, everyone's had that experience, and hopefully they'll be able to pull, from past experience and give an example for you. For competency-based questions, those focus specifically on job-related skills needed for the position. So this gives the interviewer a sense of an applicant's job performance and attitude toward their work. So an example could be, tell me about a situation in which your communication or your communication skills made a difference in an outcome. This gives insight into a common but yet very important skill needed for many roles. And then, of course, there's our technical questions. Those are crucial for when you're hiring for roles that require specific tech skills or expertise. So that gives them an opportunity to demonstrate their problem-solving skills and their practical knowledge of the field that they're in. So for, say, an IT or a tech-related question or technology question, you could ask, how do you secure a server against common cyber threats? Based on that role, that assessment could be next. They can answer that question, and then usually an assessment of that, of their tech experience may be next or after the interview, after all the interviews take place. Again, as I mentioned, I do have an interview guide that we've put together, I'd say probably a year or 2 ago, that we share with all of our hiring managers, really kind of spelling out how an interview can take place, both virtually and in person. We've provided them a number of questions they can ask that are competency-based, how to start off an interview, how to close an interview, questions that you want to avoid. So again, if we have the time to share, if I have time to share it later, I absolutely will. If not, I'll be sure that you guys still have it as another resource. Okay, so now we're at the stage of beginning the interview finally, or being in the interview. So it can be a little bit stressful on both sides, possibly more for them than it is for you, which is, again, completely normal. But you'll want the candidate, or you want to try to put the candidate at ease, make them feel relaxed, comfortable. And so I would suggest conducting an intro of some sort before starting any interview. For example, you'll want to welcome the candidate, introduce yourself and the team, and talk a little bit about what the position that they're applying for is. I'm sure they have a good understanding, but it's always great to kind of give an overview or a brief summary. And then what are they to expect in this interview, and kind of getting them, that's a good starting point for beginning an interview. Taking notes. I mean, I recommend some version of note-taking, depending on what works well for you. Is it, I'll handwrite everything, and then, place it in a document later? Am I, whatever works for you. And if there's the option to record an interview, that's perfectly fine, as long as you ask permission from the candidate beforehand. Sometimes with panel interviews, if there's a number of folks involved or somebody can't make it last minute, recording the interview will allow them to go ahead and watch it at another time, or if you needed to reference a certain part of the interview, you can always use that as well. And why is note-taking so crucial? And kind of at the same point, say you have multiple applicants scheduled for interviews for the same position, maybe on the same day. And in this, instance, it can be really difficult to remember who answered what question in what particular way, and what makes them different, or their body language when they were talking, what was different from somebody else, and any other factor that happened or occurred during the interview. So that's a lot of information to process and recall in an accurate way. So that's why you really should never evaluate how an interview went just based on your memory alone. You want to try to keep these notes to a minimum, whatever is needed to identify those key facts and jog your memory later, especially when you're doing an evaluation. Of course, all your notes should be job related. Nothing that would incorporate information related to the applicant's membership of a protected class. That's very important. Your main focus should always be on what's happening in the moment and the quality of your interactions with the applicant. You'll want to practice active listening and show active presence, which can be hard when you're trying to, note take and take in their answers, and still, be an active listener and be present. And with that, what could help is making sure you ask only one question at a time. Again, I know that sounds very straightforward, but I'm sure we've all had the experience where, they're starting off with one question, and then it kind of flows into another question, but then they're also trying to maybe re-clarify the question, and then it ends up being like 3 or 4 questions in one. We really want to try to hammer in and hone in on one question at a time. You can start off with those easier questions, gradually build to more difficult or those searching questions. You don't want to lead or prompt or interrupt the candidate in order for them to find their answer. Give them that space, to take a moment if needed to really think about, a response. And then avoid any type of facial expressions that could lead to or deter an answer. A general head nod is fine, a gentle grin, things like that, but nothing, that could lead or deter an answer. And I know I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but you want to minimize those internal and external distractions. You want to focus on what the applicant is saying. Listen to the whole answer before asking the next question. And of course, you want to, you're checking your facial expressions. You also want to watch the interviewee's facial expressions and their body language as well. So you may notice, during an interview that short, even one word answers are provided, which may not give you the full scope of what you're trying to ask. So we want to shy away from those types of answers that may derive from closed-ended questions. So I'm sure we all know what a closed-ended question, but a simple one is, did you work at Mary Center? Yes. That is a closed-ended question, kind of ends from there. But with open-ended questions, that encourages candidates to provide longer answers, expand on their knowledge, their strengths, and their job experiences. So this demonstrates their ability to articulate, their work that they've achieved, their level of motivation, their communication skills, their ability to problem solve, and their just general interest in the job. Open-ended questions provide a sense of an applicant's potential for success in the role. And we have plenty of open-ended questions on our interview guide, again, which I will share. And if you happen to fall into a closed-ended answer or an answer that maybe not fully understood, or it could be too vague, or the answer requires additional context, you want to add in a follow-up question. So reference back to that closed-ended question that I just gave an example of that says, did you work at Mary Center? Yes. What you could use as a follow-up is, can you tell me a little bit more about your work at Mary Center? Or can you give me an example of a major project during your time at Mary Center? That gives them, hopefully opens the door for them to be able to follow up and really get that answer that you're looking for. And again, with those follow-up or reflection questions, they can help you achieve a deeper understanding of the applicant's responses. So this can help to demonstrate their responses are understood. They can provide the applicant with additional opportunity to elaborate on their responses. So sometimes it can be helpful, and this is also kind of channeling your active listening is, well, let me say back to you what I heard. You mentioned ABC. Did I understand you correctly? Making sure that you're clarifying what they said can also be helpful, that they can agree or have a moment or a space to then actually re-clarify what they were trying to say. And so, you're rounding out to closing out the interview. Typically, this would be the role of the hiring manager. They would inform the candidate that the interview is ending, and they would offer the candidate the opportunity to ask questions. They gain, clarification on any aspects of the position, employment details, such as what, their work schedule could look like, the location they're going to be at, their availability to start. You want to be as forthcoming as possible here to avoid, something later down the line that says, oh, that was never told to me during the interview, or I thought I was going to be here rather than there. So you want to make sure that you're being very clear. You can explain, the time frame for the rest of the interviews, if there are subsequent steps in the process, such as that assessment, if needed, or when a decision is likely to be made. You can explain how they can get in contact with you or the recruiter, whoever the point of contact is, and when you can expect to hear from them. So taking these small yet really key steps can ensure the applicant is kind of left with a positive impression of their interview, their interviewers, and with your organization. So after the interview, everyone in the interview should, I say must, but really should complete their feedback form. So we actually restructured our candidate evaluation form about 2 years ago, and that better aligns with our values, but it also includes short sections on qualifications and overall feedback. Again, I can share our feedback form with you just so you kind of have it, but also I can share some others that we've come across over time. But regardless of the evaluation form, you'll want to keep the form short and the rating scale simple. I believe ours, I think it's maybe a total of like 10 questions, maybe 12. And it says the main core of it is, meets expectations or exceeds, meets, or below expectations. We keep the rating scale very simple. So you want to debrief if you're, part of an interview panel. You want to debrief after the form is completed. I know some exchanges are made right after an interview is completed, but those forms should be filled out individually. Go back to your notes, review before completing your feedback form. And while we all may be prone, to be making snap judgments of someone we meet for the first time, it's best to curb that impulse when completing your evaluation form. Any one single factor shouldn't influence the entirety of your feedback. You want to do your best to approach every candidate interview with an open mind. This is why taking notes is so important. And again, as mentioned in a previous slide, you or your recruiter should keep candidates informed of next steps. Should they expect an assessment next, that final interview, or will a decision be made soon? Maintaining open communication, especially towards the end of this process, really continues to convey the importance of a positive candidate experience. And lastly, I would encourage you to encourage your hiring managers or anybody that's part of this process to really reflect on their evaluation practices and identify areas for improvement. This could mean establishing a feedback loop for managers to share their experiences and challenges and what can be improved moving forward. I know we spend a lot of time talking about the interview phase, and that's a ton of info and information to take in. But if it's your first time participating in interviews and you're just generally nervous when it comes to interviews, even though you aren't the interviewee, check in or lean on your seasoned staff who do participate in interviews often or have been part of hiring processes for so long, or hiring decisions. They can help you out. I'm sure they have plenty of tips to share with you as well. And I also just wanted to be sure to touch on this topic as we're coming to an end. And we essentially covered, most of this information, but I'm sure, we all recognize how important this topic is to the recruitment process. So with that being said, how do we mitigate bias in the recruiting and hiring processes? So here are some, key takeaways for you. We all have individual biases to acknowledge, and you should talk through and think through what your strategies to manage or mitigate them, especially in this very important process. You can talk to your fellow teammates, your manager about it. If you have a DEI colleague in that space, even when it feels, very uncomfortable sometimes to talk about, I think talking through it and kind of leaning on others can kind of help you work through those strategies and what you can do to be better. Having that consistent framework places each candidate on that equal playing field. So any touch point that you have with the candidate, if it's the initial interaction or scheduling the interview or post-interview, that should all be very structured and consistent across your recruitment efforts. And as we've been discussing, fair and effective hiring practices, remember that well-trained evaluators and well-structured interviews protect your organization from unintentional discrimination. And it also ensures an efficient process that hopefully results in better hires. And if I can leave you with one last point, it's really important to know that your role in the hiring process is vital to your organization's success. Remember, this is your opportunity to play a part in selecting a future teammate or a colleague that shares in your organization's mission and values. And I think I might have skipped a slide, so let me just go back because I think there's one. Oh, this slide got skipped. I'm so sorry. I just realized that. I don't know how it got skipped, but as I was talking, I realized that this section got skipped. So I'm so sorry. So just really quickly, this is after we discussed the types of interviews, what kind of questions can be asked in the interviews, what questions shouldn't be asked. And again, I'm so sorry. I don't know how I skipped over this. But still before the interview, you want to make sure that you're selecting a diverse interview panel, whatever that means for you in your space. So, and I also want to preface that an interview panel may not be suited for every role that you're hiring for. So some roles may only need one interview and the hiring manager kind of makes their decision from there, which is fine. I mean, it happens often. But for those positions that require or need a number of individuals and their feedback, for those participating in those panel interviews, you want to take time to explain and confirm your goals for the position and for your team. So the main hiring manager, kind of the leader of the panel, will typically take this role on, but they'll also lean on the interview panel themselves for their input. So discussions that could be had or questions that can be talked about are, what are the success factors for the job? What are those core knowledge, skills, and abilities that you're looking for in this role? Everyone should be on the same page here. You don't want to, and it doesn't need to be like a super lengthy conversation. This can be, a quick Teams or Zoom call and 5-10 minutes kind of talk through the position. and at least a day or two, and have these questions answered so everyone goes in with the same intent. And hiring managers should be working towards being more thoughtful and intentional when selecting panels. This is something we're continuously working on with our hiring managers. So for this training specifically, it's important for you to take on a role as a stakeholder, providing your input and building up your teams and hiring, for top talent. But remember that your voice does matter and your input is important, as well as the input of the panel, which is why it's so important to be, well prepared for the interviews. And for the panel themselves, I don't really think it should include more than 4 or 5 people. I even suggest less, just because the larger the panel gets, could get very intimidating for the candidate. And one leader or one interviewer, typically the hiring manager, they would serve as the leader of the panel, while the other participants kind of serve in supporting roles, asking questions. Is it going to be a round robin? Everyone kind of knows what questions they're asking, or is each person taking a specific section of the set of questions to ask during the interview? Regardless of what's decided, there needs to be just some version of structure. And then you'll just want to make sure that you aim to represent a diverse hiring panel that will be involved in some capacity of the work that the position is performing. And so is it a teammate at a different level within the organization? Individual that works in a different department, but in a very similar role, but they'll also work very closely together. Diversity in this space can mean, anything you want it to mean. Is it involving folks from a variety of positions, is age ranges, cultures, races, genders, personalities, work experiences? It really could be however you want it to look like. So that my presentation. Again, I'm so sorry for having to jump back. I didn't even realize that I skipped over the slide. So we'll go ahead and go back through. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to take those now, or I'm happy to kind of show you our interview guide that we put together, as well as our feedback form that's really straightforward. Whatever you guys prefer, I'm happy to do.
So Deanna, there is a question in the chat. So it's from Bridget, and it says, for current employees to participate in the process, would you advise this only after the candidate is a finalist?
Is that in terms of like participating in the interview panel?
And Bridget, maybe if you want to unmute yourself, if you want to explain further about your question, feel free.
Sure, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, sometimes I toy with the idea of having current employees, potential colleagues involved in the process, but I question at which stage should that occur. So, it's kind of almost damned if you do, damned if you don't, in a way where if you have them involved too soon, then they may like a candidate, and that candidate ultimately is really not going to move forward. If you have them involved later on, once a candidate is a finalist, they may not be on board, but yet the candidate is a finalist, and you ultimately select them. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts about the stage in which to involve current employees who would be colleagues and not direct reports.
Right. I think that's a great question, and it's definitely come up in our organization as well. Managers question, when is the best time? Should we even involve them? I should be, I'm going to be their manager. I should be making the final decision. And I know with Mary Center, and it tends to work fairly well. So usually we have them, their resume has been evaluated. Manager wants to move forward. We do that initial phone screen with the recruiter. Then they'll typically do their first round of interviews directly with the manager. And then if needed, we'll do that panel interview. So with Mary Center, we do it a little bit further down the line. And then if there are any reservations that are coming, sometimes we'll do one last, check-in, a quick interview with the manager one more time with the candidate, or we'll have them we have these assessments, they're called predictive index assessments, that basically kind of round out our process, and it kind of dives into their work style and their work behaviors a little bit more, which is a really cool assessment. But we definitely introduce the candidate, or we have the candidate go through several layers before it makes it all the way to the panel interview, and that seems to kind of really work for us. But there have been, to be completely honest, there have been situations where, you know, they're stellar throughout, or everybody really you know, enjoys this candidate, and then, you know, they get to the panel and they poo-poo them. But I think having these initial stages in place, you're kind of able to evaluate then if they'll be a good fit, and hopefully by the time they get to the panel interview, everyone's on board and want to bring that person on. So that's been our experience with Mary Center, and it tends to work out mostly.
Right. Are there any other questions for Deanna? Feel free to type them in the chat or unmute yourselves to ask any questions.
While that's happening, just to, because I know you guys have other things that you want to cover in your session today, I do just briefly want to show at least the interview guide. I think it's we're really proud of what we did, and we actually, it was a committee that put it together. That was just not it wasn't only the talent acquisition team. We actually got insight and input from other managers who have participated in interviews, and really it was kind of a group effort. So I'm really proud of it. So let me just get out of here really quickly.
And Deanna, no rush. We have some time for sure. So feel free to share some of the other docs that you mentioned throughout the presentation.
Yeah, let me go ahead. Can you guys can't see anything, yes or no?
Yeah, I can see the interview question guide on the screen.
Okay, wonderful. I'm going to see if I can zoom in a little bit without hurting your eyes. But basically, this is the guide that we ended up putting together. Kind of gives, you know, what the purpose of this. It is a couple, 6 pages long. So you definitely don't want to use every single question, and this isn't, you know, the end all be all in terms of questions, but we wanted to put something together for our managers, especially new managers or new leaders that have been promoted and they're not really used to, you know, participating in interviews. We wanted to put this guide together for them. And again, during when everybody started working from home a bit more, I think this was a nice reference or a nice tool for them to have. So we kind of give them, you know, what you should do before the interview begins. And as I mentioned in the training, you know, introduce yourself, state the position, talk about the position a little bit, and Mary Center, and what to expect. And then we've hyperlinked basically all of these sections of our interview guide that, you know, if people, again, like if they're doing a panel interview and you have Jane taking all of the competency-based questions, and then you have John taking the work style questions, they can kind of already be in their space or look ahead and say, all right, what questions do I want to ask under work style, or what behavioral health question, or again, behavioral interview questions should I ask? So all of these are hyperlinked here. The most important one is, I didn't hyperlink properly, but this is towards the end. The example questions that you want to avoid during the interview. Anything, again, related to 1 through 9 here. Sometimes those questions do pop up, and so we kind of want to make sure that we avoid them before they even pop up. Or if they do pop up and it has happened, you just kind of, you know, accept whatever is being said and then kind of move on. But you yourself should try to avoid any types of questions that relate to any of these. But then again, also what you should do after the interview. We form, they need to brief with the hiring team, and then usually what needs to happen next in the process. So again, this is something that we've put together a year or 2 ago and has been a wonderful managers. And if this is something that you guys would find beneficial, I'm happy to share it with you guys. And you guys obviously can tweak as much as you need. I don't know if you can see, but it says my internet is unstable, but hopefully you guys can still hear me okay. So I wanted to share that. Does anybody have any questions on this guide?
So there was just a question about sharing that. Yes, if you want to share it with me, I can share it with the rest of the group.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to share this. Yeah, and then just really quickly after that, let me see if I can pull up our interview feedback form. So this has kind of evolved over time. When I first started back in 2018, the feedback form was paper. So every time they came on site, we would have to print out, however many interviews and try to collect them after the interview took place. And not every interview took place at our admin site. We have 5 clinics and other locations. So it was really hard to make sure we were capturing everybody's responses. So then, after that, it evolved to an editable PDF that we would just send along with the interview invite, kind of prompting them like, hey, this is also attached. Don't forget to fill it out and send it back to us. Sometimes, there were some managers that were really great about it. Most weren't. And so we were finding ourselves being like, oh, how did that interview go? Oh, I didn't even fill out the form. So then, with Microsoft or Office 365, they have these wonderful forms now that you can create. They can be a link, and then you'll go ahead and receive the responses directly, which is awesome. So this is our super straightforward feedback form. As I mentioned in the training, ours is focused on our values system. And then again, there's, some questions towards the end that are just about like basically, qualifications for the role. So we have all of our managers basically fill out this section. We want to make sure that we are capturing, and we have, we're filing these appropriately after we receive them. But our values are PART. So it's based on participant-centeredness, accountability, respect, and teamwork. So these are the main questions that are asked. And like I mentioned, rating scale, very, very straightforward. Exceeds, meets, below. For all of these related to our value system. And then towards the end is the other feedback, just making sure, double checking their educational background, their prior work or volunteer experience, their preparedness, and then just their general overall impression and recommendation. And that's that open-ended answer where they can really kind of dive in on their impression of the candidate. So again, I'm happy to, if this is something you want to work off of, or I'm happy to kind of download an example and share this with you as well. And I can share, the previous versions that we used, which were okay, but I think this one, I think managers are able to complete it like within 3 minutes, 3 to 4 minutes. And I think they appreciate that. They're very busy. So again, I'm happy to share this at other versions that I have as well. Are there any questions about the interview form or feedback form?
Yeah, if you can share that with me as well, Deanna, and I'm happy to share with the rest of the group.
Absolutely. Okay, so I'll go ahead and stop sharing. And hopefully I can just come back in easily. Let's see. Okay, I'm back. So yeah, that concludes my training. I hope you guys found some value in it. I know some of these items are very straightforward that we discussed, but other things to consider and keep mindful when you are recruiting and hiring for positions. But if there's any other questions, I'm happy to answer those now, or I can be quiet for a little bit and you guys can kind of take it from there. Oh, I do see the chat now.
Any other questions for Deanna before we close out the training portion and move on to the discussion? All right. Okay. All right, so it looks like no questions. So I just want to thank you, Deanna, for all of the information that you shared today, and for taking the time to come and join us and give us a little bit of your expertise around this topic is really important. So again, please share those documents with me, and I'll be sharing those with the rest of the group. But other than that, we're going to be sticking around for some discussion. You're more than welcome to stay with us, but I know you might need to head out. So thank you again for your support.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's almost it is 4 o'clock over here. So I do have a couple of other things to get done, but just one more time, thank you so much for inviting me and having me in the space. So I hope you guys all have a great rest of your session and a great rest of your day.
All right, perfect. Thank you. Have a good one.
Take care. Bye.
All right, everyone. So we're going to jump into a quick breakout session just to discuss and kind of open up a little bit more of the discussion in our breakouts. So I want to invite you to screenshot this. For some reason, it won't allow me to copy and actually put it into the chat. So screenshot this, take a photo of it so you can take it with you to your groups. So the questions that we want to discuss are, what are some of the recruitment challenges that your health center is currently facing? The second question is, what, if any, strategies have been put into place to address some of the challenges that you've been facing? And then the last question is, what resources, if any, does your health center need to address recruitment? So I'm going to open up the I'm going to stop share here so that I can open up the chat. I'm sorry, the breakout rooms. There we go. All right, I'm going to open them up now. And we're going to meet for about 12 minutes or so. So I'm going to open up the rooms. You should be able to join the group now. All right, so let's kind of just debrief, maybe one or two folks that would like to share what was discussed in your groups regarding the questions. Yeah, what are some of the challenges that you're currently facing when it comes to recruitment? Any resources that you're lacking? Would anybody like to share? All right, I'm gonna pick someone. George.
I was just chanting, "Don't pick me, don't pick me, don't pick me." I put out too much energy out there. Okay. Yeah, we looked at all three questions. So in general, ghosting was one of the biggest challenges. Um, Getting an applicant, looking at an application, getting to the point where you're ready to interview someone and they just don't show up. So one of the strategies discussed was actually having those interviewers or interviewees show up to the facility to conduct an interview face to face, as opposed to online, which seems to be the trend now. Zooming is efficient for the applicant in question, but it also probably gives them that ability to just not show up. Where if I imagine if someone is scheduling and you're making your phone calls, it's more likely that it might show up. I think that's from my perspective, it's kind of a 50-50 either way. My my challenge was more along the lines of we were having difficulty getting good applications. So what we did was we reevaluated all the vendors. We used the third-party vendors to just to post our positions, and consolidated by eliminating some of the more common vendors, and going a little more social media heavy through LinkedIn, their platform, and creating a much better visual platform through LinkedIn to recruit some of the more difficult positions, and that's actually been very fruitful for us. And we tend to get just as many applications, but when it comes to good applications. We end up not getting all the people who just apply, even though they've never been a dental assistant, but they figure plumbing is good enough. And that's just a joke, but it's indicative of where we've been. And then as far as resources, one of the things discussed was looking at, because Leticia was saying that when she gets an application in her clinic, she immediately interviews. Now, I think that's not indicative of where I've ever been with Eisner, but it would be great if we had people walking in and we can interview immediately. But I think we all kind of said something along the lines like job fairs, having structured and frequent job fairs would be a great place to really bring the community and more people in, make them fun, maybe put some food out there, might entice people to come in from the community and even outside the community. But for me, for Eisner, our biggest resource we need is a bigger recruitment budget, not necessarily to hire more recruiters, which still would be great, but to provide incentives for people to sign on with us. Because the market is changing so swiftly, you can't keep up with the dental assistant that's been a dental assistant for 2 years is looking for $30 an hour, as you just can't keep up with that. But you might be able to give them a $5,000 bonus that doesn't equate to more than that money the next year, because their salary is going to be a lot less than that $5,000 bonus. They might come in for 25, get a $5,000 bonus, and moving forward, you're still around 25 an hour. So those types of things, but bigger recruitment budgets is probably what we need more, just to keep pace with the market's 6-year turnaround. 6-month turnaround.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. So I heard several things. One is that you're getting folks that are just not showing up, which is challenging, right? You can't interview folks if they're not there. And then the other part was kind of shifting your ideas around how to recruit. So more utilizing some of that social media platforms, LinkedIn and other things, instead of some of the third-party vendors. And then that last piece was that budget that you would need to entice folks to actually, have a little bit more momentum with either applicants, and also with them actually investing time in the organization. And then I heard one more thing too, is engagement, right? So you mentioned the career fairs,
Yes.
have more time to communicate and actually talk to folks out that are looking for employment. So all important things. Anyone else? Yeah. Anything else that you want to add to that?
No, but my amazing superstar recruiter, Jacqueline, is here. Did I miss anything?
No, not on that. I think you covered everything. And then I think I could share on my end on just what we talked about too.
Sure.
On my breakout. So on our breakout team, sorry for the first question about like the barriers. It would be that especially in healthcare, we get grants and things for programs to fund certain position titles, new position titles in the organization that are very, very, very specific. Things related to diabetes or HIV or prenatal care, postnatal care that require very specific backgrounds or experience, and it's not always easy to find. So yeah, we could use all of the resources that George talked about and try to overcome those barriers. But at the end of the day, sometimes you have to go back to your supervisors and managers and say, and kind of bargain with them. Sometimes you have to take a less than ideal candidate. Sometimes the perfect person always isn't available, and you have to take a chance on someone that has those foundational, qualities that you can help build them up to be who you want them to be in the organization, instead of just closing your eyes and ears and only wanting the person that checks off all the boxes. So it's kind of knowing when to kind of have that conversations with the hiring managers and help them see potential where they might not see it, or be willing to take on someone that isn't everything that they want them to be, but willing to train them and mentor them into the right candidate.
And if I can ask a follow-up question, Jacqueline, what do you think, like in terms of like training folks, is it just because there's shortage of staff, folks are not able to take the time to train? What do you think that is?
Yeah, I think that's what it is. I think that the reason why a lot of the supervisors want the person with the perfect background is so they feel like they don't have to take those extra time to train them, because they're already overwhelmed with all the stuff that's on their plate, which they do have a lot of stuff on their plate. But I think what it is that even if you do have the person with like all the perfect backgrounds, they still need training. Like everyone needs training. Every organization does things differently. And you know, sometimes the person with less experience is gonna pick up on things and be more willing to work with you on the way that you want to do things, instead of, you know, kind of bringing their own ideas and not being willing to adjust. But yeah, I think it's time, and they're overwhelmed, and sometimes they need more support with things like leads and you know, lead DAs or lead medical assistants, or lead someone in the department that can kind of fill in the blanks, so they're not spending all their time training.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So promoting within their team with someone who's experienced, give them a lead position so that they can help with that process, so it's not so overwhelming on the manager.
Yeah, and you hit a really great point there, right? If there's a pathway for folks to be able to move up, and there are positions under the right, like it's a little bit more manageable because now you have trained staff, right? That's been there, understands how the health center works, how their teams work, and so on. And you're just training staff that might be newly coming in. One of the things that Deanna talked about in her presentation was hiring folks that are sometimes they do have some kind of experience, whether internships, whether but they're fairly new to the field. And so what are the ways that we manage and balance those things out too, right? These might be really great folks that might stay with the organization for a long time if they're given a chance to be able to grow and learn, right? Yeah. So really great point. And I'll go back to George. I see your hand up.
Yeah, actually, one of the things I wanted to ask, it's more of an ask, with grants, most of them have a sunset. It's usually 12 months to 24 months. And do you find yourself, when you hire for a grant, hiring as a perm and then having to absorb that that cost in your payroll budget moving forward? Because we do here, and I often have wonder, like, what do other facilities do when they have a grant? My preference is always hire for what you have. If it's a 2-year grant, for 2 years, and then move on from that point, or incorporate somewhere else, incorporate the person. But it's just a question more than anything else. But I do find that grants can be a little bit difficult for your next budget, or 2 years from now budget, if to entice someone you have to hire permanently.
Yeah, and that's so that's a question for the group. Would anybody else like to comment on that, on how that's worked with your individual health centers, or how that works, how you manage that? All right, folks might be stuck on that question too. George.
I was trying to raise my hand, but I couldn't
there you
figure out
go.
how. Sorry.
All right, go for it, Wilmer, go for it.
It can be difficult. One of the things that we've done in the past is that we've used a grant to make the justification for a position or a role. So we may have, and then that will allow us to budget for that position long term. So it might be maybe a role that would be temp, or some kind of support role that we can maybe not be budgeted for, make the push, get it under the grant funds, and then we're able to kind of make the justification as to why it is needed for the long run, for the long term, and then that kind of helps make the justification for it. That's the way that I feel that I've seen it be most used successfully. So it still ends up being some form of a band-aid, to be honest.
Thanks for that, Wilmer. All right, so I'm looking at the time and I want to be respectful of your time. We do want to do that giveaway and also just kind of the final poll that we do at the end of each session, just to get a little bit of your feedback. So I invite you to please fill that out. I'm going to have Alex pull up that poll and you'll see it pop up on your screen. But in the meantime, while that happens, I want to do the giveaway. And I see that a lot of folks kind of left us. So if they're not here, they won't be eligible to win today's giveaway. So we have to run this more than once. We will do that. So yeah, so you should see the poll pop up on your screen. Do that while I do the giveaway here. Let's see who's gonna win today's raffle. And it's for a $25 gift card. All right, George, look at that. Look, it paid off. You didn't want to participate. You were like, don't pick me, and you got picked twice today. So congratulations. All right, I'll be sending you that gift card over at the end. By the end of the day, you should receive an email with that information. So keep a lookout for it.
Thank you much.
Yeah, of course. Thank you all for your participation. We really appreciate you being here, being engaged, and really, engaging in the conversation around these topics. We have 3 sessions left. Next week is a 1-hour session. So we usually do an hour and a half, but next week is the data collection training. And so it's only going to be from 12 to 1. And then we have 2 more sessions after that. So yeah, I will make sure that all of the information is uploaded and updated on Chatter. I know there's a couple of presentations that need to be uploaded, so I'll make sure that gets done by today, and you will have access to all of that information that Deanna mentioned during her presentation. So have a great rest of your day and enjoy your weekend. Take care.